And with us today to share his story is Ryan Backmann. After Ryan's father, Clifford, was murdered during a 2009 robbery at a construction site office in Jacksonville, Ryan worked tirelessly to assist other crime victims and make a positive difference in the lives of many. Ryan's remarkable strength and can-do attitude led him to create an organization called Project Cold Case to provide services to victims of unsolved crimes. And Mr. Backmann, if you'll come up and share your story, please.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It was an honor to get the call to know that someone or some people thought that my story was important enough to be told and invite me here to do that today. So I do that with great thanks for each of you for listening and inviting me. On October 10th, 2009, my wife and I woke up like any typical fall Saturday. We watched game day, started watching football, and started getting ready to go to some friend's house to continue watching football. I got out of the shower and I grabbed my phone and I had 2 missed calls from a blocked number and a voicemail. When I checked the voicemail, it said, "Mr. Backmann, this is Detective so-and-so from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. There's been an emergency and I need you to call me right away." I returned that call. He said, "I'm turning into your neighborhood now. Are you at home?" And I said I was. And I said, "Is everything okay?" And he said, "No, but I'll tell you what's going on when I get there." So I turned to my wife and I said, "Something bad has happened. The police are on their way." In my world, naive world, there had been a car accident and my mom maybe was in the hospital with a broken rib. But I went out the door and went down to the end of my driveway at the same time that an unmarked car pulled up and 2 plainclothes detectives got out. They introduced themselves and they said, "We're sorry to tell you this, but your father was murdered earlier today." My dad was 56 years old. He was working on a Saturday for extra money as a side job to help care for his wife of 24 years who had terminal cancer. He was by himself in a newly renovated office building, literally vacuuming up drywall dust when someone walked in, shot him first, then took his wallet and walked out. My dad lived long enough to call 911 and give a brief description of the man that had just shot him. There was no real physical evidence at the scene. There were no other witnesses. My dad lost consciousness on the phone with that 911 operator and was pronounced deceased at the hospital. He had propped the door open to the office building he was in, so there were no fingerprints on the door. He used a revolver. There was no shell casing. There has been no DNA evidence of any value that has been found. The interaction appears to have been very quick, and my dad the only one that actually saw who did this. As you can imagine, getting that information out of the blue when the worst thing you could think of possibly happening is a car accident can be a little traumatic and devastating. My wife and I tried to continue as business as usual, normal, and that's just impossible to do when you've been victimized like this, when you've experienced this kind of traumatic loss. A few months after my dad was killed, I lost my job, and I was pretty much at a very low point in my life. My wife and I were 3 days away from celebrating our 2nd wedding anniversary when my dad was murdered. We were very young, starting out in life. This curveball was a struggle for us, to say the least. As the days turned into weeks and turned into months and no arrest happened, you start to wonder if they're ever going to make an arrest. Less than a year after my dad's murder, I became a victim advocate. I started going to support meetings that helped me to be surrounded by people that had experienced the same thing I had experienced. And that was kind of a turning point in my life. So I became a victim advocate to help other people. About 1.5 years after my dad was murdered, the detective called me and asked to meet. And I thought, oh wow, they've got something. They know who did this. He asked me to meet him at a restaurant. We sat down to eat and he said, "We've exhausted all leads. We've tested all evidence. We have nowhere else to go. We had a $13,000 reward through Crime Stoppers that never received 1 tip. And they said, we're suspending your dad's case. It is now a cold case." So I had been trying to prepare myself that they may not catch the person who killed my dad. But I never thought to prepare myself for the day they were going to tell me they couldn't look anymore. There was nowhere else to look. And at that point in my life, I realized that I was in a very unique situation, but I wasn't alone. I was advocating for other families that had lost loved ones to violence, and I was learning more and more of them had unsolved cases as well. And so in 2015, I started Project Cold Case. I started the organization to narrow the focus to just unsolved homicides in the state of Florida. I knew that we had 1,400 of those in Jacksonville alone, and that was just going to be the start. As my wife and I, lived our lives, we started a family. I started looking down at my daughter, particularly when she was born, and realized that one day she was going to ask where Grandpa Cliff was, and that I was going to have to explain to her that a bad man had taken her grandfather that she never got to meet. And then naturally her next question was going to be, was the bad guy in jail? Because when you're a child, the bad guy goes to jail. And I was going to have to explain to her that sometimes the bad guy doesn't go to jail. And I thought, when I have to have that conversation with my daughter, the follow-up to that is going to be, but you know what we did? We started an organization. We offered our help and advocacy and support to families like ours, and we reached out to law enforcement, and we worked with law enforcement hand in hand to help raise awareness for these cases, to publicize these cases, to advocate for these families who sometimes feel forgotten, who sometimes feel that their loved one, no one cares. And that's a horrible place to be. And so we have fought to provide them something that had not been provided in the past. I'm very proud of Project Cold Case and what we've been able to accomplish. We have a database with over 5,000 unsolved murders from Florida alone. We also have volunteers that help us track cases from outside of Florida, and we have 17,000 total cases. We provide support groups for families like mine. We provide contact with law enforcement, who I have a wonderful relationship with. Sheriff Sadie Darnell is here. I sit on the Florida Sheriff's Association Cold Case Advisory Commission with her as the only citizen and advocate in the state. That's another thing I'm very proud of that we've been able to accomplish. And I see the hard work and the commitment by law enforcement across the state, and I'm proud to be a part of that. And I am honored, again, to be here today and to be able to help promote these cases and publicize these cases and make sure that those families know that someone still does care and that people are still looking for their loved one's murderer. And thank you again for being here. We have a tagline at Project Cold Case, and sometimes, against all odds, against all logic, we still hope. So thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. When I was meeting with some of the victims' families before today, I told them how I knew that this was such a difficult day for you to go through that story again, but how important it was to all of us to remember what you lost and the effect on your lives. So thank you for being here and sharing your story. Your strength is inspirational.